Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Lucie Talks. My name is Alice Dyson, and I'm director of the Lucie Foundation. We are pleased to partner with Women Photographers International Archive again for the 2024 WOPHA Congress, taking place October 22nd to 26th in various locations throughout Southern Florida. While we just get right into this conversation, no time to waste. We will have a Q&A at the end of this talk. So please send any questions you might have to the comment section and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Now, let me introduce to you the founder and director of WOPHA, Aldeide Delgado.
Thank you so much, Alice, for this introduction. I would like to express my gratitude to the Lucie Foundation team for their support in organizing this conversation, as well as Nadia from the team at Aperture. My name is Aldeide Delgado. I am a Cuban-born, Miami-based art historian and curator, and the founder and director of Women Photographers International Archive, WOPHA. WOPHA is a nonprofit organization committed to researching, promoting, supporting, and educating on the contributions of women and non-binary photographers to modern and contemporary art. We recognize that there are different ways to be a woman according to class, race, sexual orientation, age, religion, creed, ability, and gender, and that none of these factors can be left out in considering the totality of cis and trans women's life experiences. WOPHA's mission includes several core pillars: research and recover primary source materials and critical documents related to women in photography, provide access to WOPHA's resources for educational and personal use, extending support to artists, researchers, scholars, and the general public, organize scholarly symposiums and lectures, curate exhibitions, both physical and digital, to highlight women's contributions to photography, support women photographers through residencies, fellowships, and other opportunities in partnership with different organizations. We develop community projects, offer electronic resources as well to assist students, schools, and the public with information about women photographers. And also, one of the main goals of the organization is to foster a global network of women photography collectives and like-minded organizations. WOPHA is dedicated to being a leading force in promoting diversity and representation in photography, ensuring that the stories and perspectives of women and non-binary individuals are recognized and celebrated globally. Based in Miami, a city uniquely positioned at the crossroads of the Americas, a political place, a border space, as identified, our work is inherently international and cross-cultural. It is because of the mission of WOPHA that tonight's conversation becomes even more special, as I am joined by two extraordinary scholars, indirect mentors, and inspirational figures whose work has paved the way for organizations like WOPHA to exist today. Susan Meiselas is a renowned documentary photographer based in New York. Her body of work addresses human rights issues in Latin America and beyond. Among her acclaimed publications are Carnival Strippers, Nicaragua, Prince Street Girls, Carnival Strippers Revisited, and her most recent book, Collaboration, A Potential History of Photography. Susan is a MacArthur and Guggenheim Fellow, and her work is held in major collections worldwide. As president of the Magnum Foundation since 2007, she has been a strong advocate for diversity in documentary photography. Sarah Meister, since 2021, has been the executive director of Aperture. Previously, she spent 25 years at the Museum of Modern Art, organizing numerous exhibitions and publications that redefine the field of photography. From Diane Arbus to Gordon Parks, her curatorial work has offered fresh approaches to photography's most iconic figures. Sarah is also leading Aperture's transition to a permanent home in New York City, scheduled to open in 2025. Her transformative educational initiatives, including MoMA's Seeing Through Photograph, have redefined the role of photography education. Our discussion today serves as a prelude to the second edition of the WOPHA Congress titled How Photography Teaches to Live Now, which will bring together over 35 leading art historians, curators, artists, and representatives from women photography organizations from around the world to Miami next week from October 22nd to the 26th, where we are going to discuss relevant issues on women in the history of photography. The WOPHA Congress is a multimodal creative convening and exhibition series. It constitutes a meeting place, a critical space for the international photography community. Building on the themes exploring our inaugural 2021 edition, this year Congress acknowledged women in photography as a distinctive discipline and advocates for the integration of these narratives into new educational programs, affirming the importance of inclusivity and diversity in framing the future of photographic education. We depart from the key observation that while 75% of photography students around the world are women, there remains a scarcity of academic programs dedicated to women's photography history. This disparity is what inspired me to select the theme for this WOPHA Congress edition, where we will confront this gap and engage in discussions around feminist pedagogies, radical teaching methods, and the future of photography education. Without further ado, I would like to invite Susan and Sarah, who will be participating at the WOPHA Congress as well, to join me and discuss during this hour. And I think that we can start. Welcome. And I think that we can start speaking a little bit about the role of Aperture and Magnum Foundation in shaping photographic education. I mean, how these two institutions have dealt with educational work and how maybe those educational paradigms have evolved over time. I think that we can start there. And then this is going to be a conversation. Please, everyone that is in the chat, let us know from where are you visiting us? I mean, from where are you watching us? And yes.
Sarah, are you okay?
Hi, sorry. I'm not actually in my office or my home, so forgive a little, a little here and there. So yes, I, as you were saying, sorry, except for that last minute when I turned away and wasn't hearing what you were saying. One of the things that I really love about being at Aperture, which is a nonprofit, just like MoMA was, is that while publishing is the heart of what we do, we were founded as a quarterly magazine, and the magazine is really an incubator for the ideas that we end up exploring online in exhibitions and in books. We have been really debating recently, is Aperture an education organization, or is it really just that we have that the idea of education is woven through everything that we do? And it was interesting. We have a wonderful trustee who helped articulate. She said, education really is about asking a question, hearing an answer, and being changed by the dialogue. And that most traditionally happens in school settings. But I think one of the things I'm looking forward to talking about with you both today is, where is that definition too narrow? And I think for Magnum and for Aperture, that and for WOPHA, that might be an inadequate approach to education.
Well, it's funny, Sarah, because I was immediately thinking about how interesting it is, and I noticed this on the celebration of the 75th of the Magnum Photos Cooperative in 1947. It was founded in 1952 as Aperture, so 5 years apart, but with they are deep roots that have connected us in various ways. I mean, they're more contemporary roots also, and I want to acknowledge that, because when the Magnum Foundation was created, we had no home except my studio table initially. And Chris Boot, who was the director at that time, said, well, we have space. Why don't you come to Aperture? So that's an important kind of, when you think about building community, it was intuitive. And actually, the first projects with Aperture came very much from being cohabitating. And I think that's important. I think the other thing to say that is also true, that I know you have spent a lot of time talking also with Kristen Lubin, who's the executive director now of the Magnum Foundation, about the ways in which we complement, because we've been supporting emerging talent, diversifying the field through grants and obviously mentoring, and you've been showcasing some of that. And that's obviously the first slide we put up. Maybe people can see there was, I think, going to the magazine, it was really important to think about whatever we were doing. The magazine was a very central role. I mean, we didn't include the various books you published of the fellows that we supported, but again, there was this organic process that was evolving in dialogue with each other. And I think that's important, how that grows over time. You know, confidence, trusting each other, getting to know each other better, see where we can do more. You know, so that's a core value set that I think we share.
And
I think
I think, sorry, could I just say one thing, Aldeide? Because I think to the question of community and how WOPHA even becomes a part of this, you know, this, to me, I was introduced, you know, it really is about human connection. So it was Deb Willis, who's an Aperture trustee, who introduced me to Aldeide, who only had to mention your name, Susan. And I was like, I'm in, you know, where do we want to
Whatever
go?
we're going to talk about.
Yeah. And it really, it feels that way. You know, I think sharing space is really important. And whether that's virtual space or physical space, it's a valuable thing to do.
I want to make you, and while we wait for our image of the I mean these initial projects between
Here.
in collaboration between Aperture and Magnum Foundation, I just want to, and as we start to thinking about education, we'd like to highlight how the process of education happens in the context of photography. I mean, it's really interesting that the photography always have been or have been carrying this idea of being an accessible medium, and how people, and if we think in the work of women, they were learning about photography in their houses. They were learning photography from a family member, from the parent, from the brother. Then it's all this kind of informality, if we want to say it in that way, in how people learn about photography. There is like a full movement of amateurs photographer, of the photoclubism that, you know, Sarah, even you are very familiar with that. So I think that the key is when we think about alternative spaces, maybe is to reflect as well in the role of, you know, where education happens. For sure, we know that it's not only happening in the universities, it's not only happening in schools, but in the case of photography, I mean, happens even more in the streets, how it happens even more from all these other initiatives that have been created by artists, by other people. And I just want to put that out there, that how, and I think that why, even with this Congress, I was so focused in bringing people that work in institutional spaces, because it was so important to think about how to transgress those spaces that, well, we know is even harder. Because when you create your own space, like happened with me and WOPHA, you have more flexibility. You can create your own rules. But how we claim for change when you are in the university setting? And I think that in that sense, the role that both Magnum and Aperture, I mean, the role that both institutions have in leading the way, in showing and influencing these other spaces is, I mean, it's significant, it's transformational.
Yeah, you know, Aldeide, just go back a slide for a moment, Danny, because I think, you know, you said spaces, and I was thinking of platforms, I was thinking of partnerships, part of which I think you've definitely been evolving with WOPHA, and we'll learn more in the next week. You know, when we did Documentary Expanded, by the fact as literally that we were embedded in Aperture space, when we wanted to create a dialogue about the, you know, these the impact we were feeling of digital technology that was moving very fast. This is 2014, so 10 years ago. We had the symposium for 2 days with 300 photographers. We just took over Aperture. Those were the days, Sarah, when you had the full 10,000 square foot space. And the welcome was to bring very disparate groups of people together to talk about all the dimensionality that we could focus on at the time. We were thinking about citizen journalism. We were thinking about social media, how it was dominating, beginning to dominate. These are the early days of Facebook and Instagram and creating traffic flows for photographers, the oversaturation of images, the lack of singular focus points like Life magazine. We were looking at all the explosion that was occurring outside of the galleries and the museums, you know? And so I think it's interesting. Documentary Expanded tries to track some of those initiatives that came from that symposium. Counter Histories is a little different. And, you know, I think important. It's not quite 10 years later, but almost. And it's an initiative which we launch online through the Magnum Foundation. We get nearly 1,200 submissions of projects relating to either state or private archives and ideas from photographers about what are the gaps in history? How do we imagine what's missing? And what do we find that's been, you know, forgotten, et cetera. And so there you have 10 projects or 9 projects in Counter Histories from the 20 that we were able to support from the 1,200, nearly 1,200 that we looked at. So this explosion of photography, again, you know, wherever you pick up a magazine, Aldeide, I appreciate the home versus the gallery versus a museum, the kind of forms of, you know, expression that people are creating with the kinds of questions that they have.
And I mean, thinking about that, how the book, and because that can take us to another discussion, but thinking on this specifically, I mean, in these issues of the magazine that are the result of other dialogues that are beyond the publication. So we are, in the case of Documentary Expanded, we are speaking about a symposium that was part of, was part of the process of all the discussion that we are going to see in this issue of the magazine. And then Counter Histories also came, or I think has evolved to the idea of mentorship as well, how the process of, that kind of relationship, that kind of idea of community is in both initiatives. And I think that if we go, Susan, now that we are speaking about books, and if we think on the role that you have had creating all these publications and being very intentional on their character as pedagogical tools, maybe you can, guide us a little bit about, for example, with Eyes Opens or Nicaragua, or even recently collaboration, how that notion of education has been essential.
Well, it's interesting to talk with you guys both as curator and historian, right? Versus fundamentally a practitioner, but one that said, and actually it's the first line in the Documentary Expanded, which I'd forgotten, but it is so key to what I still feel is true, which is that we know photographs make frames, but we deeply believe that photographers also make frameworks, right? So framework moves into the book form. And when you have the opportunity to work with a publisher who responds, so these are 3 different publishers, in fact, that we're looking at. But I think the important thing is creating the space for the work that you think gives, you know, creates the home for it, you know, if you're lucky enough. That's a really, you know, an extraordinary thing. And I'm particularly excited about Nicaragua. I guess we can go to the next slide, Downey, because Nicaragua is coming out as a 4th edition, thanks to Sarah.
No, thanks to you, but
well, both of us working together on this, but you know, initially it had one kind of life. And I think that the 2nd edition of Nicaragua incorporated a film, which we're not going to see. Danny, you can just go through the next couple of.
Susan, would you actually describe, you know, for you had already done Carnival Strippers. Would you just, I think people might be curious to know, you know, how, and I actually don't know the origin story of Nicaragua. Did you
Oh,
come to someone
oh,
at Aperture? How did that?
no, that's wild. Actually, Aperture wasn't the first publisher, it was Pantheon. But Pantheon didn't exist with the same publisher. They did not want to reprint it. And that was Aperture. So that's why, I mean, it's not how I got to Nicaragua from Carnival Strippers. Let's not go there.
No, no, no.
But in terms of bookmaking, the important thing was that Aperture responded. And the second edition, which we don't have a picture of here, the core of the book photographically remains the same. At the very end, in the second edition, this is now hold on this for a minute, Donnie. This is the spread of the fourth edition, which is coming out this month, I think.
Mhm.
But the second edition, I had gone back 10 years later to Nicaragua and made a film called Pictures from a Revolution. And I wanted that DVD to be in the back of the book. So I wanted to challenge the idea of the photographing of a moment in time over time and cut through the linearity of a book that you turn the pages and it's over, to open up that time for the people in the photographs moves on and continues. What happened from the second edition, which had the DVD in the back, the third edition was a number of years later, and happily, I developed something called the Look and Listen app, which was a customized app where you could move your iPhone over a picture and immediately cut to a video clip. So instead of having the whole movie in the book, and now this is the last iteration, which is a QR code. Because amazingly, because of COVID, Apple decided that QR codes didn't have to have their own website. You could go right from looking at that QR code to the video clip. So again, the premise of this is, how do you
Also,
acknowledge?
Susan, I have the earlier
Oh, great.
edition of the
That's the
book with
second.
me.
That's
So,
it. Yeah. And of course, DVD don't exist anymore. So we don't have
Yep.
DVD players in our computers.
Yep.
So how do you make something that continues to express the trend and respond to where technology is moving? It was a heartbreak that Look and Listen app, when the Apple moved to another operating system, we decided together to go to QR code. So, I think a book, again, you were talking about spaces, Aldeide. Can it respond to the kinds of questions and, ask new ones? Eyes open, we don't,
I think that, and I just want to highlight, I mean, with everything that you have said about, I would like to highlight the importance of temporality. And I
Yeah,
think that
exactly.
even when we spoke recently for the interview that I did to you, that was one of the topics that I was very interested in. And I think that when we think in educational projects, there is also this factor. I mean, it's one of the elements we think about. In many cases, these are short-term projects, or in other cases, as you are trying or have been doing with the publication, it's like trying to like update that kind of research or going back. Again, I reinforce the idea of community, because I think it's essential in your work how, you become, or you turn the reader into an active participant, and that's into an operator, in someone that can have the tools to go and, produce their own work. And if we go here to Eyes Open, we can speak more about that. But I would like to highlight like the methods that you are using. In the first, we are seeing you are including DVDs, or you are including the QR codes all the time, asking people or asking the reader to create their own curriculum, to create their own resources. And I think with Eyes Open, the idea of instruction was fundamental, the idea of creating those questions, and that's how you establish that kind of engagement. So I will let you continue, but I just wanted to.
But that's great. I mean, yes, this notion of in time, a photograph in time, timely, timeless, revisited over time is definitely something that, is a longer conversation that maybe we'll get to have next week. I think, you know, eyes open, as I look at the slide, of course, it's missing the very first project I did, which the photograph you used for the announcement comes out of my teaching in South Bronx. I'm in a classroom. I'm working with Polaroid cameras and building a darkroom in the classroom. And it's really an early visual literacy approach. The important thing about Learn to See, which was published by Polaroid Foundation at the time, it was 100 teachers who responded with different ideas of what they thought could be done with photographs. And I think that's fundamental to where did the learning come from? It was sharing. Eyes Open comes from, again, Sarah, somewhat at Aperture, as you know.
This was before my time, but yes.
It is, but Denise Wolf was the head of education at the time. She knew Learn to See. She first said to me, why don't we just reproduce Learn to See? And I said, but we don't have Polaroid films in classrooms, and the world has gone on beyond the classroom, which, Aldeide, that goes back to your question about where do we learn? Where do we see images? Where do we experience them? So the idea of Eyes Open was we went back to some of the key projects that were embedded in Learn to See, but instead of just having the prompts to the students, and this was middle school students for the most part, we went out to, I'm not even sure now if I remember, 50 schools, all of whom got these prompts, and the teachers then, with their students, sent in photographs. And Denise and myself, in collaboration with a few assistants, we started to look. And then I wanted to juxtapose artist work, so this is Zoe Leonard, with the same theme. What is same but different? Same but different is a very important tool for young kids to start to see a little more specifically. I mean, this is a time, you know, where so many people were oriented to themselves, the selfie. How do you get them talking about themselves, but looking at the fundamentals, learning the fundamentals of photography? So light, it obviously, or movement. In terms of light, the next slide, I think, gives you a much more sophisticated reading of light from Alex Webb. So each prompt was a mix of student work coming in that we essentially curated competitively and matched with artists that we thought were using a similar kind of visual vocabulary. This is the one that, of course, was very popular. Just talk about me. And yet, you know, what I loved is it was asking you to go beyond the image that you might share, but what else about you is not in the image? And of course, that's why Wendy Red Star was such a wonderful, you know, contrast for them to begin to think about how do you layer photograph, go beyond what was literally in that initial frame. You know, this is one of the last projects. I think there are 23 projects, Imagine Landscapes. And I love seeing this. And this came from students. So it was full of surprises. I love that they were stitching on the photographs, drawing on the photographs. And of course, there are others that we feature as artists. But I think, you know, this is a book that really is a response on one hand to Learn to See, and it's a response to a 360 world where the visual literacy is surrounding us.
And if we go to now that we are seeing collaboration and looking at the structure of Eyes Open, in which you receive the idea of collaboration has been essential in your work, and we know that since your first project. What I found interesting as well with this book is that the discussion start with you, but again, we see that model of bringing all the discussion to the classroom and creating all the conversation with the students. And again, I mean, it's like starting in the classroom, starting with the students, with workshops, with conversations with them, creating the book, and then bringing the book back to them. Because again, you can instrumentalize, let's say, this publication and make it your, and also opening opportunities for people to add their own stories.
Yeah, it's interesting because back to Nicaragua, that was bicultural. It was in English, French, and Spanish, very different communities to interpret and understand that particular history. If you think about Eyes Open, it was going back to the classrooms and the idea that those students had participated, right? And their project was part of an ongoing dialogue, and it was also translated into French, and I think it's in its second edition. So it's definitely, I remember meeting adults who said, "What do you mean this is for my kid? This is for me." Because how do you begin to create your own visual vocabulary using a camera, right?
Awesome.
I think collaboration, the only thing, because we don't have that much time, I could not have gotten to collaboration myself without the projects I did in Latin America after Nicaragua. So El Salvador Work of 30 Photographers was very central, bringing together a group, a very broad group, 30 photographers, all working at different time frames. We don't have a slide of that, but and Chile from Within, in which I don't have my work present, but I meet the community of Chilean photographers. And this is a whole dialogue we maybe don't have time for, but the North-South access. You know, we're still in a world in which at that time, and this is the late 80s, it's the North defining the other regions, whether it's Europeans or Americans traveling to Africa or Latin America. So a lot of my practice right from the beginning was responding and being in dialogue with regional photographers. Those two projects very kind of organically lead me to be interested in this notion of collaboration that extends to 5 of us. And my little surprise for you is I was looking at the documentary expanded book and just our little introduction. And I had totally forgotten that Ariella Azoulay had a piece in it in which she talks
Who's one of the editors
I
of
saw it.
Collaborate.
I saw it. I saw that
and
you
she
have been.
and she talks about the prefix co in terms of co-laboring and co-thinking. We barely knew each other then, right? But of course, she becomes a central force in the creation of this book. So Wendy Ewald, who's also had a long history in education and will be at the conference, and you know, I've learned a lot from her, and we've shared. She was the only person who has continued as intensely as she has, who was part of Learn to See, and that's how we first met in the Polaroid project. But Wendy and I, as practitioners, are part of collaboration. Laura Wexler is a feminist historian, Lee Rayford from African American history, and of course Ariella. Those 5 are very much co-laboring for 10 years in the making of this project. And I think it was also, I have another surprise for you, Sarah, because I don't think you know this. Had we had a little more time, I would have brought this slide in. We actually did the first installation of collaboration at Aperture.
Oh, really?
And I only thought about it about an hour
Oh,
ago. I thought I should have put that slide up. You gave us what was at the time in the 10,000 square foot space and a long wall. And we took blue tape and began to put photos and quotes, because the emphasis of collaboration was not just the author, but also the participation of the subject and community. And then the next layer that came in the book were people writing about the collaborative nature of these projects. So there are about 115 projects, there are 115 projects. And we're going to talk, I know, at the WOPHA next Thursday about this in more depth. But I think this is a project of mine, Kurdistan, which is a co-archiving project, which speaks back to what inspired Kristen Lubin, who was a curator at ICP and a historian, and I together in the counter history. So it all becomes like a circle of revisiting, different ideas that we can then share and expand audiences through these different kinds of publications. But you know, that day at Aperture was amazing. We had over 100 participants just there putting Post-it notes all over these squares, suggesting what more we should be including. And so that act of inclusion of those who were the readers, right, was really another kind of circle. You know, the photographer, subject, and those who read and become part of the act of interpretation, of course.
And it's one of the things I love about that book is that, you know, there's so many signed elements to each one of those ideas of class. So you frame them thematically, and it's like the idea of a history of photography that isn't defined by geography, isn't defined by chronology, but really takes as its organizing principle what does collaboration look like? What does consent look like? And even this morning I was at NYU talking to a class, and that was the second question that a student asked. We were talking about Dorothy, and she was saying, I'm not sure how I feel about this. And it remains a
So
really.
that's great for you, the curator of the last Dorothea Lange show at MoMA. But
Well,
you brought in her writing, something that people hadn't paid attention to really.
Yeah, I think, Lang is somebody, what I tried to say, and I actually think Lang's work, if I'm being honest, if you want to go back 2 slides, I'm not particularly satisfied with how it's characterized in this, but I feel that the thing that I admire about this is that it's bringing forward these different perspectives on the work. We don't have to agree in order to have a meaningful conversation. And I think that was what I was trying to say to these students, the spirit of, of saying, okay, here's the fact of this photograph. Here's what I see in it. Here's what I bring to it. And that might be different from what someone else sees or brings to that. And this is where I think photography as a pedagogical tool, as something that is like, the idea of nuance is so woven through, shades of gray. It's like there's actually no such thing as, well, there rarely is a black and white photograph. These are the things that teach us how to approach difference. And in that, I find the disagreement to be as generative as having a conversation with people where I agree, so.
Yeah. So actually, this is interesting because we are at WOPHA going to have a number of squares to give people who don't have the book a feeling for the way these dialogues, as double spreads operate. I think this is a good example. I mean, sometimes we're including contact sheets if we can. In this case, we're showing alternate frames, some that are known.
Should I annotate it to show where I disagree with what the
Sure, sure. But I think one of the very important things that we all know is that, I mean, those who have studied this, let's say, not all. I mean, we all know migrant mother at some level, all is not all, but, a large group of people.
It's a well-known photograph.
It's a well-known, so-called iconic. It's in our cluster called iconization, is preceded by collaboration. And so these clusters are what become looking like chapters. This is a very central one. We give it the subtitle, The Exhausted Photographed Person, because of the history of what happens to the person in that photograph. I was just talking about pictures from Revolution and wanting to know how the people in my photographs 10 years later felt about being who they were, living through what the revolution evolved to be, and their reflections on that. And I felt that was as important as the photograph itself, that video clip of them reflecting.
Here, and I think actually, sorry. Sorry.
No, and I'm just going to say here, when you've got Florence Owens and her kids, Owens Thompson and her kids talking about how they felt about being her children as this picture had a life of a different kind. And then it brings in issues of remuneration, and that's a big one right now, or participation in where the photograph lives in the collections of various institutions, the fact that she becomes a stamp, and all of these, we want, nuance is the right word. We wanted to problematize as many relationships in photographs and photographic practice to open it up, to open it.
But I have to say, I guess my primary challenge to this is that to return to the question of time and how time-based a response can be. It is, and with Lang in this photograph in particular, it's truly a matter of days. Like when we were trying to figure out why was this made in February of March or 1936, and what did that mean, and what had happened between those moments. And for Florence Owens Thompson, what did it mean when she and her family left the camp, when the news articles were published? when the information that Lang clearly wasn't recording at the time because she was tired and rushing home, as she described in 1960. So again, 15 years after she made this picture, she writes about it for the first time. And then how did Florence Owens Thompson's own family and their evolving feelings around it, from feeling that they had been cheated by Lang, that they somehow never got anything out of it, as if she had. And while I think certainly reputationally she got something out of it, I don't think they understood that she was working for the government. Lang and the government, neither of them profited from this photograph. They circulated it to make a difference. And this is where I think, to the question that the student asked me this morning about consent and collaboration, this family came to understand the greater good once they understood the nature of Lang's relationship with the government. And even, when they did in effect an early GoFundMe Kickstarter project, when it became clear that she was dying of cancer, an article went out on the wire. I think it was $35,000 came into the family, often just like dollar bills stuffed in envelopes, for people for whom this picture had meant so much, had given them hope in a moment where there had been no hope. And so it is interesting to think, and this was where my objections were, is like, having done that research to try to figure out and to anchor those various moments in time, I think they're really critically important. And I think they're important for us as humans also, and this is one thing I want to talk about next week, is how we grow up. And my own thinking around my work is more nuanced than it was when I started. I read some of the things I wrote and I'm like, oh.
But that goes back to the primary question about this whole process of education. It's not a fixed process that gets finished. It's an ongoing one. And I love what you just added to us. And my first reaction was, I wonder what Abigail Solomon Godot, who wrote about the migrant mother at the time that we did the book. And then I'm thinking, when did I see your show? And would I have seen something in your show that would have changed what we then published? Because of course this was done 3 years ago. So, it's not quite an evolving door. That's not quite the right metaphor, but it feels appropriate to ask, what, for any of us, what did we know when? How do we know what we know? How does what we see change what we think we know? And that's really exactly what I think Aldeide is hoping to do, is inspire precisely these kinds of questions.
I am taking as and with everything that you are mentioning, I am listening to you, because you have, all this experience, either curating the show or working with this image. The notion of the incomplete task, or the idea of, and here I am going to quote like another colleague that we speak a lot, we call each other, and it's this notion of productive failure. How we are all the time, Alpesh Patel is his name, he has a book on title in that way, but it's this idea of how we fail and how we have to embrace that as part of the learning process, as part of taking risk, and how we allow that space as well to happen, either in the classroom or in other settings of education, like online programs. I know we don't have too much space for more, but if we want, and Sarah, if you want to speak a little bit, because the other element that I wanted to highlight is the online component, online education, and how even from your project of seeing through photograph at MoMA, and how that, let's say, that evolved or shifted into or took a new direction with the photo book club in Aperture, or the Inside project. So if you want to speak a little bit more about that.
Thank you. It is so interesting. And that idea of learning as something that we're all going through. So We did one version of Seeing Through Photographs in 2017. And then in 2020, we revisited it because we felt that there were areas that we had underexplored. It was, as you can tell, largely unscripted. So we tried to like excise out the things that were really grossly inaccurate, but there are still things in it where I'm like, oh, did I really mean that? Could I really get away with saying that? And when we did the second version, it really was a group effort to say, what could we do better? How can we respond to the changing needs of the world? And Aperture on Site, that online curriculum, and Susan is actually in both of these, which I love. But Aperture on Site, we're in the process of refreshing that curriculum as well, bringing in other voices, other projects. So it's true that photo book club that you mentioned at Aperture, that was something that emerged out of that feeling of community, of learning together, that I felt it very significantly. And in fact, I would say it might be one of the things that led me to leave MoMA was the Seeing Through Photographs was was a very popular course on Coursera. And it was so popular that Coursera decided to survey the people who took it. And they discovered that 30% of the people who signed up in the first 2 months had never heard of MoMA.
Wow.
Never heard of it.
That's fabulous.
But they
Interesting.
signed up. You know why? We know why. They signed up because they were interested in photography. So they saw Seeing Through Photographs. Didn't matter if they'd never heard of MoMA. Many of, and
That's
I
fascinating.
think it really is.
That is
And I
really
think
fun. We
that
should
is-
have more such surveys done about our bubbles.
Yes. But honestly, this is where I feel like, hey, photography is the bubble we want to be in, because that's the conversation that's the international one. That's the one that appreciates art, but doesn't privilege it above other forms. That's the one, the truth is photoclubismo that you mentioned, Aldeide, that was an exhibition that rested uncomfortably at MoMA because it was about amateurs, and amateurs are about imitation. How can you make something that looks like something else effectively and well? And that, in an institution that privileges originality, that's a complicated conversation. And
I was just thinking that to make another point about online, because what I'm hearing from you about that evolved around COVID. And our experience at the Magnum Foundation, COVID really impacted us because we had a 6-week based in New York, international group of photographers coming, emerging talent to actually, it was initially with NYU and then it moved to CUNY. So when COVID happened, we were immediately thrown off. It was, what are we going to do with this major program that we were quite invested in? Fred Richen taught in it. It was initially called Human Rights, then it became Social Justice. It led us to a whole new, more innovative and more appropriate model, which was so it goes back to new tools and opportunities, right? So COVID happens, we build the cohort online. We have much more resource because we're not traveling people and housing them and hosting them and all of that. We're able to have Sohrab, in Hura in New Delhi as one mentor, and Nusha Tavakolian in Iran as another mentor, which would never have happened quite in the same way with the 6 weeks New York-based program. So it's since then trying to think about these hybrid cultures. We also know hybridity has kind of destroyed many operations and maybe small groups, and getting back to when we are together physically and when we can benefit from hybridity as we are right now. These are very important. I love that WOPHA will be both. Magnum Foundation now live streams all the talks we do. We created that as a priority so that we can reach audiences either in time or again over time.
I have to mention that WOPHA, and now we are going to respond to questions that we have. But WOPHA doesn't have a physical space. We
Mhm.
work in collaboration, and you are going to see it next week, how we have created programs in more than 10 institutions across South Florida. And it's part of that collaboration. I found the WOPHA in 2018. So it really was 2018, 19, 1 year, the pandemic. And then
Right.
we kept the digitalization, the online programs that, by the way, everyone who is watching us, they can also see join us virtually at the Perez Art Museum YouTube channel and join the discussion on October 24th and 25 next week. And I am going, because I know we have like 10 minutes, so I am going to read you, Susan. This question is for you. And it's from someone. They said, "It is so wonderful to hear this discussion amongst you all. I am a Salvadorian American artist based in Miami. My question is for Susan regarding access. What is the best route to print and develop film photography in 2024 and beyond? What are your thoughts on digital smartphone photography? More broadly, as a question to everyone regarding access, I would like to know if WOPHA, oh my God, I lost that question. What happened? One moment.
Here, I can finish reading it. We'd like
if-
to know if WOPHA plans to offer financial aid to attend the
Mm.
conference in the future.
Where the conference,
sounds-
to attend? Okay, because
Yeah,
the
that's
conference
what
is
the
free
question is.
access. Because the conference is free access at the Perez Art Museum.
But you have to
is-
get to Miami.
But I have to get to Miami, where I would love to,
Are you
I would
going to
love
be
to do
live
it.
streaming?
Yes, as
That's an
well.
important, so they can participate online, and that's an important message for whoever was asking. I
Mhm.
mean, obviously, printing and developing film is particular to wherever you might be, and I'm not in Miami to answer it specifically. There are fewer labs, no question. And do I use my iPhone as well as a film camera? I don't use a film camera as much as I have in the past. I do use a digital camera under different circumstances, a different camera. You know, I'm always changing formats based on what it is that I'm doing. But I think that that's I think that's very specific. And you can reach out to me, but I think that you do better in Miami to ask somebody who's there, based there.
We are going to, yes, please, you can reach me. I am very, I mean, all my contact information is in my Instagram, WOPHA Instagram. Please reach out, and we hope to see you next week as well, and come and say hi. We have another question that says, well, Susan, are you currently working on any new project or book that you can share with us?
I'm curious.
Multiple projects. I mean, I think I said to someone even earlier today, right now I'm going back to go forward with a couple of different projects. I'm revisiting a few projects that never found their form. You know, and I said earlier that as a photographer, you might make frames, you need to create the frameworks for them. Sometimes they come very organically, and sometimes things fall aside. You don't have time, you move in a different direction. There are a number of juncture points in my life where I took one fork and I might have taken the other, you know, and so I'm looking back at some of those projects, rethinking them, thinking about could they be contextualized in a new way. So I'm not going
I
to
think
go.
I do think that the COVID created a way in which a lot of photographers almost started doing their own recuperative histories. So it's like my job as a curator is to look for histories that haven't been told in the field. And I love how many photographers found threads that had been underexplored or underattended to that
Exactly.
really deserve, that forced isolation almost.
Because exactly, Sarah, because we had time. We had time that actually Eyes Open is done during COVID. And again, I didn't mention how I think I said how collaborative it was as a team, but it was extraordinary to be able to put that whole project together online, essentially. We had a few meetings in person and then COVID hit, but we were able to gather and curate all this work from students from around the world, as well as work with a designer that was based in England. So the whole, and I did a similar project, which is called Tar Beach in my neighborhood. both projects were very anchored at the COVID period, where you were isolated, but you could use this new form. We all discovered Zoom. Here it is. It's part of our daily diet, maybe more than we'd like, but there it is. It gives us this sense of a community, but I'm very glad we're coming to Miami next week and we'll be present.
And something that I wanted to mention is that Florida International University, we are partnering with them. They have dark room and they are really interested in having people. You don't have to be necessarily a student, but they want a student in the university, but they want people to go and use the dark room, because it's a reality that people, or the students in this case, are less interested in using this kind of facilities. But we are going to discuss, and we have an artist who will be speaking during the Congress, that she also is a great advocate about how important it is to have access to the dark room to facilitate, let's say, that learning process, and how even if you work digital, it's important to have the analog know-how, for saying in that way.
An experience.
Then, exactly. So 2 other questions and we end. How do you see consent of subjects in photojournalism changing with the ever-increasing ability to disseminate images online, and the dangers that the subject may face based on the situation in their country, what is occurring in the images?
That's an incredibly important question. I'm glad it's been brought up. It's maybe too late to get into it in detail. I think, you know, Sarah talked about consent. There is something called the consensuality is felt. You just know whether or not you belong somewhere and somebody wants you to be present, or I never feel like I have a right to make a photograph without that feeling that I'm welcome in some way. That doesn't mean under very difficult and extremes, you stop and ask for permission or sign a form, which I know, legally they'd love you to do, but you can feel it in the eyes. You feel it in the presence, whether or not you belong or it's appropriate. I think what is much more difficult than 40, 50 years ago when I began was, with carnival strippers, I was able to bring the contact sheets back and show them weekend to weekend to the women who I was photographing. I wanted them to see me seeing them. Today I can show them on the back of my digital camera the picture I made, or I can upload the picture, but I can't protect them from other people doing whatever they choose to do to those pictures. And so a duty of recontextualizing or attempting to create homes for or context for whatever photographs I may make or others make, that responsibility I take very seriously. But the difficulty of protection, especially in the new age of AI, I think that's going to be your next seminar.
Yeah. And I just, the only thing I would add is that I think that a photographer, any given picture, that you can't answer that question. In other words, Susan, I think it's over the course of your career, over the course of Lang's career, where that consistent attentiveness to the impact of your images at a given moment, and it may change in time, the political situation changes, whatever. And I think just understanding the conditionality of that and the way in which I think certain photographers deserve that, it's not really a benefit of the doubt is the wrong way of putting it, but you've earned and demonstrated consistently your care for this. And it's what makes it your picture different from what another photographer approaching the same subject might do, or in my mind, be appropriate for them to do.
Yeah. Well, earning trust and feeling, knowing what you feel is appropriate, all of that is very subtle. That's a whole.
It's a life learned.
Yeah, it's a life.
And the last question that I want to share, because it brings us again to the personal, and it's like, how do we all meet and get together? It's interesting and refreshing to see shared passions in one space. So what I think.
Well, we haven't physically all met together yet. That'll happen next week.
Next week? I can't wait. Susan, this picture of you makes me just want to melt. I love it. I mean,
yeah.
Talk about time.
Yeah, talk about time. 54 years ago in the South Bronx. Building a
But-
darkroom in a classroom for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. That's where it all began for me. I never thought I was going to be a photographer. I just love the medium as not only an expression, but a connecting point, you know, and I still feel
I actually
that.
I thought I was going to be a teacher. I never thought I was going to be a curator.
Mm.
An
I just
elementary
wanted-
school teacher at that.
Well, we're
I just want to say,
so lucky that you guys both took the routes that you did.
And
Thanks.
I just want to say and highlight, because in the question of how we met, I mean, I want to mention the Willis, because she has been, I mean, a person super special, dear to me, and where I think the one who has facilitated even that, I mean, that I am able to be in contact with you both. And super grateful to her, honor to
All
have
love to
her
Deb.
support
Yes.
and friendship. So I just wanted, in this context of education, to bring her as well, because when she's fundamental and another of
To the whole field,
of our
really.
luminaries.
Yeah, we've all learned so much from Deb and through Deb, and of course the generosity of sharing each other.
Yeah, since the first time. So I am
Creating
super
community.
grateful for her generosity and your generosity, for being part of the Congress, for sharing this space, for the trust, for the support. And we invite you all to join us next week. As I said, the program is free at the Peterson Museum, and you can also watch all the conversations virtually in PAM's YouTube channel.
Great.
Thank you guys so much
See you
for
next week.
this.
Next
For
week.
everybody who tuned in maybe a little bit late and caught the tail end and missed the beginning, this has been recorded, so it will be put online on the Lucie Foundation under Lucie Talks, and you're welcome to watch it as many times as you wish. So thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful time at Congress, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Alice.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Alice.